Ce qui se passe dans les bois est un véritable podcast sur la criminalité. Nous discutons d'événements qui sont souvent de nature violente. La discrétion de l'auditeur est conseillée. What Happens in the Woods is a true crime podcast. We discuss events that are often violent in nature. Listener's discretion is advised.
In his interview, he kept saying over and over that his mind wasn't working and he couldn't control himself and he didn't want to do this anymore. His story is that the deaths were accidental because he had 50 altogether and only 4 of them died. There's no telling how many women he really killed. My belief is that he killed more than the ones he was convicted of. I think that's how he got his jollies. He'd have rough sex with these women and strangle them in the process.
Nature versus nurture. It's a question that can easily be debated from both sides. Can the findings of that question be allowed as evidence in a murder trial by the defense? Could it be used in the manner such as mental competency is used, to base whether or not a person is fit to stand trial for their crimes? Maybe what we should be asking isn't could it, but should it? This case starts us off in the little town of Eureka in Northern California. Typically, this small area in Humboldt County is infamously known for its aged redwood trees, diversity in culture, and the import and export of marijuana. But in the months between October 1997 to November 1998, none of those things were the top topics in anyone's mind. From beginning to end, the murders we are going to discuss and even the apprehension of the man responsible for them were terrifying to think of or hear about in the news. This is True Crime Podcast, What Happens in the Woods, with your hosts Jess and Bryce. Let's get started. We're back again. I know everyone missed us. How's everyone doing? How are you doing, Bryce?
I'm good.
All right. So to start off, I need to do a correction for the last on the last podcast episode. I fucked up. I did get some information wrong.
Really?
Yeah. So in our last episode, if you haven't listened, we discussed Alaskan serial killer Robert Hansen. I mistakenly said the name of the assistant district attorney wrong. I think I said it was Paul Rothschild. It's Frank. Frank Rothschild is his name. So I fucked that up. And then I also heard some information that was contradictory to the information that I had. So apparently he was eventually able to get his pilot's license.
Oh.
I guess he had on his first application listed the lithium that he was taking for his bipolar disorder as a medication. And of course they rejected that and said, no, you can't have a pilot's license while you're taking that. So I guess sometime after that, it's possible that he applied again. And he admitted or omitted that medication and was able to get the license.
Huh. Okay.
So it's possible that he did have it. I'm not sure. So the documentary that I watched that claimed he didn't have it, maybe they were wrong. So there you have it. Could be wrong, could be right.
Okay.
So I kind of wanted to throw out there real quick. If you are subscribed to us and you listen to us regularly on iTunes and you haven't reviewed us yet, why the hell not? We just want your feedback. We want to hear from you guys. 5 stars would be great. I'm not going to lie. I would love to see nothing but 5 stars. But no matter what you rate us, if you can leave a comment, that way we get the feedback from it. And that's what I most want from it.
Yeah. Good, bad, or ugly, we'll take it. Feedback, honest feedback, and we love constructive criticism. Well, I mean, we have no problem with it.
Yeah, no, we want to know how you guys are feeling about it. I know iTunes is one of the main ones that you can leave a review for. There might be other platforms. I'm not quite sure. But more than anything, just let us know what you think. Like, do you think we're doing well? Do you like the changes that we've made this season? Are there cases you want us to cover? Just feedback. We would greatly appreciate the feedback. So I don't even care that there's somebody that left us a 1-star on iTunes. I care less. I just want to know why. I'm curious.
Yeah. They just left it with no feedback.
Yeah. So if that was you, come back and tell us why, please. Or message us or something. Bryce, do you have any updates for us?
So our disclaimer this week was Canada, from out of nowhere. I mean, honestly, nowhere. Canada just rushed to the top of the list. I'm going to say it's because of Crimes in Closets, our friends over there, Christy and Beth.
It could be. I'm not sure. It also could be, you said we made finally the iTunes list.
Oh, well, it's just on there. Our name is on there.
Oh, I thought we made something. Never mind. You had me excited for no reason.
No, we haven't hit the new and noteworthy yet.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, whatever the reason, thanks for listening. We appreciate our Canadian friends.
To the north.
Yes. All right. Speaking of Crimes in Closets, we also want to remind everybody that we have a collab coming for a special Halloween episode that's at the end of the month. We recently recorded with them, and we had a lot of fun. I think we spent more time like chit-chatting and like fangirling over each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Than we maybe did talking about the case, but it was just fun. It's fun to interact with them. And even now we like shoot each other texts when we see something interesting. So it's a really nice connection that we've made with them. And I that is exactly what I was hoping to get out of this.
Yeah.
So it's really cool that we found that with them. We hope that you guys have been going over and showing them love too. Spoiler alert, Bryce actually talked for like 10 straight minutes.
I was forced to.
Whatever. You took it and you ran with it.
Sure.
Yeah. So if for nothing else, listen to that. Come in and find us and listen to that as Bryce talks about what he found for, a good amount of time.
I had to fill my time. I don't think the 3 ladies would let me get away with less.
No, you were definitely going to be doing something.
Yeah.
All right. So Bryce, are you ready to take a trip down memory lane?
I'm scared.
So this is a case in a criminal that I personally vividly remember because at that time, Eureka was the town that you and I called home.
Yes.
Yeah. When this happened, I was just days away from turning 19.
Yeah.
You and I were barely dating. And even if I didn't know it, I was pregnant with our oldest daughter. I remember going to Chinese food and being so sick. And I don't know. I have the flu for like a month. I just don't know.
Me neither.
Yeah. So this is definitely something that we were very aware of and very, I don't know how it hit you, but I thought about it quite often while this was in the news and how scary it was for me that this was happening very close to where I actually lived at the time when some of this took place. So I'll get into that a little bit later. So we are here to talk about the crimes and the victims of convicted serial killer Wayne Adam Ford. So in this case, Wayne Ford turned himself in for his crimes. One of only a handful of serial killers to do so. You don't hear that very often where they turn themselves in out of guilt. Sometimes they turn themselves in because they want the notoriety and they want the recognition for their crimes. In his case, it was out of guilt.
Yeah.
He was very remorseful for what he had done, didn't want to do it anymore, according to him. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but according to him and his defense team, that was one of their, look, he couldn't be all that bad because he turned himself in kind of thing.
No, and don't mean to plug again. Yes, I do. But Crimes in Closets, they did their serial killer September wrap up, and they said, they don't turn themselves in, but they definitely brag about their accomplishments, I guess, as you would say.
Right. Yeah. So there is a lot of this backstory that is just what you would expect to find in a serial killer's history. It's also very relevant to the crimes and the outcome of his conviction, and that's why I did kind of go at length about some of this, a little more than I wanted to. So I wanted to be brief, but when I was going over it, I just kept thinking, how did no one see the signs with this one? And what I'm about to relay about, his history, his family, is literally just the tip of the iceberg with these people. I could have made this whole entire episode an hour long about his background and not have gotten into any of the crimes. It was that much information, and it was overwhelming information.
Yeah.
That at some point I couldn't keep going down that rabbit hole because there was just a lot going on between the family, his parents and their parents, and then him and his brother. It was just a lot.
Wow.
So Wayne Adam Ford is the youngest of two boys in the Ford family. Growing up, the boys were very close to one another. Wayne really relied on his brother, Rodney, as like a moral compass. And there were times when he would do something wrong and he knew it. And he would share this information with Rodney because he knew that Rodney would make him admit to it and help him make it right. So he didn't really have a problem doing what he was doing, but then he would feel bad about it. And Rodney would, say, okay, this is what we're going to do. He would take charge and there were still repercussions to the actions.
Yeah, but he leaned on his brother.
Right. Which continues, throughout their adult life. The relationship with his parents seems, it's exactly what you would expect when you're doing background into a serial killer or sociopath. From what I can tell, his parents, the marriage was rocky at best. I read that his mom, Karen, she was only 16 when she met his dad, and not quite 18 when they were married. She was already a couple months pregnant with Rodney by that time. So she wasn't technically an adult even.
Yeah.
It stemmed from her wanting to leave her mom. She wanted to get away from her mom. Her mom was mentally abusive.
All right.
So she did whatever the fuck she could do to get away. And at that point, it was they lived in Germany at the time. She is from Germany, and they were close to an American Air Force base. And it meant that she would go and try to find American guys so that she could start a relationship and hopefully get married and leave.
Okay.
She wanted to get as far away from her mom as possible.
Yeah.
So she suffered from serious depression issues, very, very serious, which I'm sure, given the time, were probably undiagnosed.
Yeah.
Right. You didn't talk about it. You just didn't talk about it. Reportedly, she tried to commit suicide at least twice, and once was possibly in front of Rodney, Wayne's older brother.
Oh.
She later denied that she was doing it, but Rodney was of an age where he understood what she was doing.
Yeah.
And she can try to play it off, but he was like, no, I saw what I saw. And it's not good. There were also accounts that she had multiple affairs while she was married to their dad. One was even reportedly with his younger brother when they finally came back to the state or came to America as a married couple. So the dad's brother, which would have been Wayne's uncle, was 15 years old. And by that time, she was 22-ish something years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's a lot. So she also at one point reportedly told Wayne in his childhood that he was a product of their dad raping her, and that's how he was conceived. When his dad found this out many years later, he denied that there was even a possibility of that. That was absolutely not what happened.
Yeah.
And said that it was just really sad that she thought that was the narrative that she was making up, and that she would relay that to a child.
Yeah, that's some fucked up shit to tell a kid.
Very much. Yeah. So, reportedly, she didn't want to have kids. She wanted to get away from her mom, but she wanted to live her life. And by having kids so young, she wasn't able to do that.
Yeah.
So she, possibly took the brunt of what didn't happen in her life because of her choices, she took that out on the kids. Very sad. So then we look at Wayne's father, Gene Ford. He was in some type of like security position in the Army. So he was no nonsense. As you can imagine, he was a very big and tall man, and he basically scared the shit out of his kids whenever he was home. I don't know that he was necessarily like physically abusive or anything like that, but it was very stern.
Yeah.
And there was no like nurturing relationship between either of the parents, honestly, because when Karen could be bothered to parent, it seems like she smothered.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was the exact polar opposite, which was leave me alone. I don't want to have, I'm done with you. Yeah. You can get away from me. So then when they did have interaction with their dad, it seemed like it was the authoritative, typical relationship of what you would expect in the, 40s, 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And being a military dad.
And like I said, his position was, it was like almost a classified position.
Yeah.
So he really probably could not share any of that aspect with his family.
Mm-hmm.
And it leads to a very compartmentalized life almost. So there's just no relationships forming here except between him and his brother.
Yeah.
Wayne was a really sensitive kid, and he couldn't handle being around his dad, and he couldn't handle, any time there was punishment that he might get. His mom would say, wait till your dad gets home, kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
And then when his dad got home, he would freak out. Essentially, he would. There was reports that he would pass out because he was so scared of what his dad would do. Again, I don't know that it was like physically abusive, so I don't know if that was just how Wayne built it up in his head. But there it is. So no shocker that these two divorced in 1970. Wayne at that time was about 9, and he was staying with his mom until she remarried. And then she was like, yeah, I can't have you here anymore. So she shipped him off when he was about 12. Rodney left not too long after that. They ended up with their dad, which wasn't the best situation.
No.
And then at some point, he was with the uncle that mom had an affair with. And then at another point, he was with a family friend. He would later go on to say that he felt abandoned by both of his parents.
Yeah.
And it just definitely led to his issues later on with, how he handled relationships and things. I also want to say this is about the time when he started like petty crimes, theft, any kind of little trouble that he could make, he was constantly in trouble.
So this is where it starts escalating.
Right. So in 1979, he dropped out of high school. I think he made it to the 11th grade. At that time, he was 17. So he decided he wanted to join the Marines. And his dad was like, yeah, that's okay. That's structure. You probably need that.
Yeah.
So he, was okay with it. And then not too long after that, he met his first wife, Kelly. So their relationship lasts for about 2 years. It was rough. Wayne, early on, I think before they got married, he actually suffered from a traumatic brain injury. While he was helping somebody on the side of the road, a drunk driver hit him.
Oh.
And there were some contradictory reports. He went to the hospital, but he may or may not have been in a coma. But he was in the hospital for a few days. The medical reports can't be found because that hospital is actually, it was a base hospital and it's closed. So they don't know where the medical records went.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's nothing to say what did or didn't happen. But it is known that he did suffer a very serious injury. So I also read that he had some personality disorder issues previous to that, but after that, his mood, like his personality changed for the worst. It was not good. One report that I read was that after the couple had eloped to Las Vegas, Wayne forced Kelly to get an abortion because he, quote, wanted a steady piece of ass, end quote. That was the only reason that he was getting married, was so that he can have a steady piece of ass, and having a baby would have put a damper on that.
Okay.
Yeah. He was abusive sexually and physically during their marriage. This is where he started having deviant tendencies, wanted to inflict pain, but also started fantasizing about like threesomes and her having sex with other people, which she's not into. She's not into any of it. The next year, so after they got married, the year after, he is arrested on rape charges of a 15-year-old girl.
Whoa.
He got a slap on the wrist. He didn't get shit. He got nothing. I don't know how it happened. I don't know how it went away, but it is like this little blip it mentioned everywhere. There's no, like, he didn't serve time. I don't know how it happened. It's kind of scary that something like that could happen and there's no repercussions for him. So at that time, he was 21 years old. And there's some reports that said she was a sex worker. I'm not sure that I buy that at 15 years old. I know it happens, but I'm not sure that I buy it. There are reports that she was just a random teenager. Yeah, I can't confirm one way or the other because there's just not much information on it.
Yeah.
1 year later, she's fucking done. She's had it and she files for divorce. So Wayne started having worsening mood and depression issues. In May of 1984, he's diagnosed with a, quote, adjustment reaction with mixed feelings and a personality disorder with explosive and immature features, end quote. I have to say the amount of times that this guy is diagnosed with anything is sad and scary at the same time because he's diagnosed multiple times with essentially the same thing. And there's the diagnosis, but then there's nothing that reports that he's getting help for it.
Yeah, there's no treatment.
They tried, but it didn't go anywhere, it sounds like. So at this time, he's in the military. So, of course, they're not necessarily ignoring it.
Yeah.
But they're doing what they can. So the same month that he got that diagnosis, he was demoted from a sergeant E5 to a corporal E4. I don't know much about like rank, but that seems like a pretty big difference. Going from a sergeant to a corporal?
Yeah.
Isn't that, that's kind of a bigger deal than just saying he went from an E5 to an E4?
It is, because I don't know where it starts, but the NCOs, it usually starts at sergeant. I know in the Air Force it's staff sergeant because you go from, airman to staff sergeant, and that's where you become a non-commissioned officer. But that's where they want you to, start leading. So if you're demoted from sergeant, like I said, I wasn't in the Marines, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to claim to know. And looking at it, it was, I don't know. I guess it didn't make sense for me to spend a bunch of time researching that when there was all the rest of this. So I'm interested to know about it, but I also was kind of like, yeah, this is not, I'm not going to spend hours on this. After this, the mental instability it snowballs. It gets worse and worse. He is again diagnosed in October of 1984, so just a few months later, with borderline personality disorder, which is, quote, severe and chronic. He's given Haldol for a violent episode, and then from there he ends up going to a hospital, being transferred to another hospital, and being transferred to a third hospital in attempts to get treatment for his mental health, all while he's in the military. So he kept getting placed in different places. Yeah. But it's not helping him. He ended up being discharged in 1985 due to his mental illness. At that point, they were like, you can't be here anymore. Yeah. You're becoming a disciplinary hazard for us. We're having to discipline you too much. This is going on too much, and you're not fit to be in the service. So unfortunately, he did get discharged. So at this time, Wayne decides that he wants to start being addressed as Adam, which is his middle name. Okay. So apparently, Rodney that is not his first name. That's his middle name as well. His dad goes by his middle name. And eventually his mom, Karen, that's her middle name, or she goes by her middle name. Her first name is Karen, but she eventually goes by her middle name.
Oh, wow.
So for some reason, they all end up doing this. So it's not odd, in and of itself, but I kind of do feel like it's him trying to disassociate himself with his issues a little bit.
Yeah.
And kind of, restart his life.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, new name, new life. But I mean,
right.
Not a new name, but using his middle name would be his start over after getting out of the military. And
yeah, it was just it was weird to me. But he doesn't use this like clean slate for the better. Instead, he spends a couple of years going through roughly 10 jobs. At one point, he worked as a truck driver making deliveries, a tow truck driver, a special needs school bus driver, and a boat repairman.
Oh, it's special needs school bus driver.
Right. So within almost 2 years, he had 10 different jobs.
Oh, wow. And where was this, in Eureka, or was this?
No, he at that time didn't live in Eureka. So after he graduated high school in Arcata, they did live in Arcata, or he did when he graduated or left high school to go into the Marines.
Oh, okay.
Because he didn't graduate. But he ended up living like in Southern California. I'll get to his second wife. They ended up living in Las Vegas for a little bit. So he was stationed overseas for some of his military career too.
Okay.
But yeah, at this point, he's in Southern California.
Okay.
So he ended up kind of feeling that some of these jobs were beneath him and that he could do better. He even tried applying for a position with the U.S. Border Patrol in 1988, but he lied on that application about his mental illness and his discharge. And this is the U.S. government. They're going to find that shit out.
Yeah.
So they didn't hire him, obviously. During this time, there were some noticeable sexual deviant tendencies that started showing. So Wayne was really into rough sex. He liked to choke his partners. He also liked to put on a show. So a couple different accounts that stood out to me. One was he was caught masturbating in front of one of his girlfriend's teenage daughters.
Okay.
That relationship didn't last too long after that, obviously. Another account told a story of him just hanging out, sitting with a man and a woman who were a couple. And he is sitting with loose shorts on. So like workout shorts, loose. He's got no underwear on. So his balls are just peeking out and he's just sitting there, like, positioning himself so that the woman gets a glance at his balls every time he moves. And it was just so he could see her reaction.
Wow.
And I don't know why. I mean, I don't know. I guess just me, if I'm sitting there and somebody's balls are hanging out, I'd be like, dude, you fucking check yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if anything was said to him or, if he was just, oh yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I'm cool. I'm good. I don't know. But I thought that was interesting. Not too long after that, he was introduced to his second wife, Elizabeth, by a mutual friend. And in 1984, the two were married. They welcomed a son after just a year of being married. So Wayne,
he was okay with kids.
I'm sorry. It was 1994, not
84.
Not 84.
He didn't want just a steady piece of ass then.
Apparently he was ready for fatherhood at that point. He had some fun. So
okay.
Yeah, he didn't need the steady piece of ass. So by Elizabeth, Wayne was described as a very absent father. Even though he was physically present, she claims that he never took care of their son in any way. If the baby started crying, he'd hand him over. He didn't feed him, didn't change diapers, didn't have any responsibility towards him whatsoever.
So he wasn't ready for fatherhood.
No, he wasn't ready. I couldn't find an exact reason, but she decides she's done with the marriage and leaves in July of 1996. So not too long after the baby's born. Some information I found was that it was because he was sexually abusive and wanted to engage in very deviant acts with her. Such as bondage and, again, having her have sex with somebody else. He was very into breasts, so he would ask that she walk around naked all the time. And just, stuff that she really wasn't comfortable with. Stuff that I won't get into because you can find it and I don't need to describe it. But it's just stuff that is demeaning and is done in a way so that you have control over your partner. And that was essentially all he wanted. He wanted control over the sexual act. And he wanted control in a way that inflicted pain. And there are a lot of accounts that are disturbing
about things that he would do to body parts while they were engaging in sex. It's disturbing. So I don't necessarily want to discuss those details because the rest of this information that we're going to get into is bad enough. Just know that it wasn't like, oh yeah, spank my ass kind of thing. It was disturbing. So there wasn't much left for him there, and they were living in Las Vegas. So when they divorced, he moved up to Eureka. He began working for Eureka Ready Mix as a truck driver. And all the employees, everybody that worked with him up in Eureka described him as just an all-around great guy. He was a good and hard worker. When, they needed something done, he was right there. He did it. Would have been somebody that, some of these guys that he worked with would have introduced him to friends or sisters or anybody that they knew as like a potential date. Just nobody had a bad word to say about this guy.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, Eureka has a lot of rainy weather, and it slows down some of the jobs. So when weather is bad, work is short, and he got let go of that job. While he's searching for work, he was actually interviewed by one of our family members for a job before being hired by Edelin Trucking. The following clips are from our conversation with Bryce's stepmom, Gwen. She previously owned and operated a company in the lumber industry up there that hired truck drivers. Gwen graciously talked to me about her experience with meeting Ford and agreed to let us put her on our podcast for this episode.
Thanks, Gwen.
Thank you. So we're discussing Wayne Ford in this episode, and I know you had met him what would have been just months before his crimes took place up in Eureka. What kind of connection did you have with him?
Yeah, that case is sparked my interest because I had contact with him, and I know his cousin, and and how it affected her when she found out, and then he drove truck for our friend. So it was like all these different connections with this guy, and never have, his cousin didn't have any idea. Mark, who owned Edelin Trucking, had no idea either, never had any inkling whatsoever that there was anything awry with him. So he was able to keep it pretty much hidden from a lot of people that interacted with him a lot.
So what was your interaction with him? How did you meet him? And what kind of vibe did you get off of him? Was there like anything that led you to feel uncomfortable or even get a sense of anything off?
I remember we had like 3 different offices out there on the property at Glendale. And so it was our first office that we had out there. He had come in and said he was a truck driver and wanted to know if we were hiring. We weren't hiring, but when I would get a truck driver that, approached me, I would give him an application and then let him fill out the application and then talk to him afterwards. And if they were a good candidate, I would keep it. If it was a bad candidate, it would go back of the drawer, kind of a thing. And so, he was, from where I placed him in the filing cabinet, he was a good applicant, but I just didn't need a truck driver at that time. And if I had needed a truck driver, I would have then bumped him to the next step, and the next step would have been Steve, my husband at the time. I interviewed everybody, and then the final one was I weeded them out, and if they were good ones, I sent them to him, and he, talked more of the fine details of truck driving because I'm no truck driver. But he was respectful. He was, answered my questions. I had no, how sometimes people make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I never had any feeling like that at all with him.
So when we come back from the break, we'll get into how the rest of this case plays out.
This week's episode of What Happens in the Woods is brought to you by Crimes and Closets podcast. Crimes and Closets is a true crime podcast hosted by best friends Beth and Christy, who met in North Carolina. Christy has since relocated to St. Louis, but distance hasn't kept these ladies apart. Both of them are married, and both are mothers to 3 kids, so their lives can be pretty crazy. So with wine in hand, they sneak off without the fam and head off to the closet to tell us true crime stories. So, if you like a little wine with a true crime, join Beth and Christy every Monday in their closets for a new case. While you're at it, subscribe to their podcast and tell them Olivia sent you. Bye!
Hey guys, this is a new podcast called Crimes and Closets. It's just 2 gals hiding in our closet from our families and all the crazies out there talking true crime with you. So if you're interested in joining us, please find us on Instagram at Crimes and Closets or on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now. We hope to see you soon in the closet.
So we're going to dive into the very disturbing aspects of Ford's crimes and how he eventually turned himself in. Now, fair warning for anybody listening, the crimes are horrible and the details that I share are minimal compared to what's out there. So the first victim is unfortunately still to this day unidentified. On October 26, 1997, the victim's torso was found by a duck hunter on Ryan's Slough that's in the very north end of Eureka. Eureka is right on the Pacific coast, and there are many waterways throughout there that, outlet into the ocean, and this was just one of them at the north end of Eureka. The body was very badly mutilated, having been stabbed 27 times. 26 of those times were inflicted after postmortem.
Oh.
Both breasts had been cut off, and the chest had been opened from the top to the pelvic bone. Keep in mind, this is just the torso. No arms, no head, no legs.
Okay.
So at that scene, no other body parts are found. All attempts to ID her have gone unanswered, including the use of DNA to, cross-match it in any system. The medical evidence was able to place her age at between 18 and 25. She was about 120 to 140 pounds. She could have been Caucasian or Hispanic, and there was evidence that she had had a child. She had given birth. Oh. Not necessarily him, but previously had given birth to a child. So there's no evidence at the scene. There's nothing but, the torso. There's no clothes. There's no anything that can even give clues as to why she was murdered, who murdered her, anything at all.
That's sad.
They don't even know how long she had been there.
It sucks because we'll never know. There's no closure for a family member either. That's the sad part.
Right, exactly. So in January of 1998, a severed arm, a left arm, is found on Clam Beach, which is in McKinleyville. It's north, what would you say, about 30 minutes from Eureka?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is a confirmed DNA match to the torso of Jane Doe. But again, it presents no leads. They are not, because of the deterioration of the fingerprints, they're not able to identify. So there's no evidence at that scene either that can help, and the case turns cold. So in April of that year, the divorce between Ford and Elizabeth was finalized. She keeps custody of their son, with visitation being awarded to Ford. He gets a week every 3 months, and then he gets every other Christmas with his son. He claims that she kept his son from him and that he was just overly distraught about it and wanted to be a part of his son's life. He, makes it this big deal to everybody he talks to about it.
Yeah.
And, people feel sorry for him because they don't understand why he can't interact with his son. Here's this great guy that everybody thinks is just this model citizen.
Yeah.
And, all around great guy. And all he wants is to spend time with his son, and why can't he do it?
Yeah.
Elizabeth tells a very different story. Not only could he not get his child support paid, he would come and see his son and then spend minimal time with him and leave as soon as he possibly could. And couldn't be bothered to reach out on other occasions when he could have made a phone call or birthdays, anything like that. Just didn't have any interaction with him that was meaningful. So completely different view of what he's trying to portray out there as, his sob story.
Yeah.
So just 2 months later, construction workers find the nude body of a woman hanging from a cable that runs across the aqueduct near Buttonwillow, California, which Buttonwillow is a town that's just outside of Bakersfield, close to I-5. So it's a major trucking route.
Yeah.
There's no evidence again, no clothing, no tire marks, nothing to give investigators a clue. Authorities also have no idea that there is a connection between Jane Doe and Eureka and this victim. They find that the victim's neck was fractured. There are bruises consistent with asphyxia around her neck, and that is actually the ruling cause of death. They confirm that she had been raped, and they do collect DNA evidence from her body. It takes them over a month to get a match on fingerprints, but she's finally confirmed as Tina Gibbs. She was just 26 years old at the time of her death. So Tina is originally from Tacoma, Washington.
Oh.
Yeah. When I read that, I was like, Jesus, we can't get away from shit.
Yeah.
Every place we've lived.
Yeah.
So anyway, really sad. But she was from Tacoma, Washington. She, when she died, she was actually living in Las Vegas. She was working as a sex worker. She had been living a really hard life for a number of years, had multiple convictions of prostitution, drug-related charges in both cities, and she was estranged from her family. Her mom and her stepdad hadn't heard from her in years at this point. They didn't know where to look for her. They tried to keep up with her whereabouts through some friends and hoped that she would come home.
Yeah.
But she never did. More than anything, her parents want her to be remembered as a sweet and loving woman who got involved with the wrong man when she was still young, around 18, and got addicted to drugs. Yeah, and it turned into, a lifestyle that, unfortunately, this is a hazard of that type of lifestyle. You can't trust who you're with, but you don't have the sense to know that you're in danger. So it wouldn't be long after that another body would be found, this time near Lodi, California, which, for those who aren't familiar, is just south of Sacramento. It's somewhat in the valley, but it's kind of on, Lodi's right in that connection where I-5 meets where one of the major roads, which is Highway 12, is going west towards the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Also, again, a major trucking area.
Yes.
So on September 25th, 1998, the body of who would be identified as Lynette White was found in an irrigation ditch near I-5 and Highway 12. Her upper body is so badly swollen. It's so discolored. It's almost black.
Oh, wow.
And she is completely unrecognizable. Her midsection was red, suggesting that it had been bent in half for a long period of time, and like blood collected there, and she had bruising there. There are no clothes on the body, but this time they actually have some evidence that doesn't come from the body. Around the crime scene, they find a brown leather work glove, a brown plaid shirt, and a blue tarp. They also find large tire tracks near the scene, and together with those findings and a shopping bag from a Flying J truck stop, they start to kind of piece together with this victim that maybe a truck driver was responsible.
Yeah.
However, again, it's not connected to the other two crimes yet. So they think this is isolated. Lynette was living in, at the time, in Fontana, California, which is in Southern California. Yeah. She had just turned 25 years old. She was mother to 4 young kids.
Oh.
Babies having babies, basically. She had been involved in drugs and prostitution, and at that time, she had 5 warrants out for her arrest. But her family kind of gives some conflicting information. So she was last seen on September 20th to go to a liquor store around the corner when she never came home. According to her mother, Lynette was trying to turn her life around, and she had recently started a good job, like selling decor items for an interior designer.
Yeah.
And, she stated she was doing really well. Her cousin that lived with her tells a different story. Says that, she was heavily into meth. Oh. Very addicted to meth. She would often walk the streets, flag people down and pull them over, just chit chat, get a cigarette, maybe engage in prostitution. In the end, it doesn't matter, because the brutality that she received, by her killer, it was horrific. It doesn't matter what she was doing out there. She didn't come home. And they said that it was unlike her because her 9-month-old baby would have been at home and she would have never gone missing and left that baby. Yeah. So they definitely didn't believe that she intentionally left. So just a month later, after that, the nude body of a female victim was found near an aqueduct in Hesperia, California, which is Southern California. The victim had been dead only a matter of hours when it was found. Oh. The most disturbing thing was that her breast was removed post-mortem. They see that her hands and feet had been bound, and they believe that she had been raped. So when the ME does the exam, the medical examiner does the exam, they find that she died from strangulation and also had a spinal cord injury that would have paralyzed her.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. Fingerprints confirm that the victim is 29-year-old Patricia Thames. She also lived a very hard life. I can't find much information on her outside of her well-known history as a sex worker. Yeah. She also had an addiction to crystal meth. So there were witnesses that saw her on the day of her death when she was picked up by an unknown white male in a black 18-wheeler, and she was standing on her usual spot in Victorville, California. That's just about 10 miles north of where she was found. So just with the other victims, just like them, there is nothing leading to a motive or a suspect. They have no evidence at her crime scene. None. So that is until November 3rd in 1998, when Wayne Adam Ford showed up with his brother, Rodney, at the Humboldt County Sheriff's office to turn himself in. Wayne's mental state at that point was deteriorated. He claims he thought about committing suicide, but on the night of the 2nd, he called his brother and asked for help instead of killing himself. So Wayne said that, he told Rodney, I, quote, hurt some people real bad, but he didn't elaborate. Rodney drove about 5 hours. He was living in Vallejo at the time, and drove up in the middle of the night to where Wayne was staying at a lodge in Trinidad. It was really odd because there were campgrounds that he stayed at. He had a travel trailer that was parked in a mobile home park in Arcata. Yeah. But he was in this lodge at Trinidad. But these were just places where he stayed. Yeah. It was weird. I kind of thought. So anyways, Rodney shows up. He claims that Wayne was erratic. He had a hard time following his mood swings because he kept jumping from topic to topic. He was reminiscing about the good old days and, some of their family life in that area. And then he would talk about how, he had hurt people and he was scared that, he had done something really bad. But he didn't ever tell his brother what he did. Huh. So, it kind of goes back to when Wayne did these things, he knew they were wrong, but he needed his brother to help guide him to turn himself in. He knew when he called Rodney that he was going to turn himself in, and that Rodney was going to see it through and not let him back out of it. So they get to the sheriff's. They say what they're there for. Rodney's like, my brother wants to turn himself in. They run his name through the system. Nothing comes up on Wayne. Because nothing has been put on his record. So they kind of come out to talk to him. The deputy is, basically thinking that this is maybe a mental health case and goes out to talk to him. Wayne is obviously not well, and they're kind of talking to him, and nobody has any idea of how bad it is until Wayne says that he can prove that he's done, quote, bad things. And he says there's something in his pocket to prove it. So the deputy gets some gloves and, puts them on, and Wayne lets him reach into his pocket, and he pulls out a Ziploc baggie with what looks like a chicken cutlet, a raw chicken cutlet in it. It's not a fucking chicken cutlet. It's a breast severed breast, nipple still intact in this Ziploc bag that it was not tight.
Yeah.
Without getting too descriptive. It was just a Ziploc baggie with a breast in it. It ends up being Patricia Thames's left breast that he had severed.
Oh.
So
yeah, I remember the stories of him walking into the office, and I mean, that was big. Eureka's not big, but that story hit everywhere, and I remember that's what everybody was talking about. It was
Eureka is not a big town. It's the county seat, but it's not. There are no big towns in Humboldt County. Essentially, there aren't. But there's crime. I mean, there's drug crime. There's physical and sexual abuse crimes. There's prostitution crimes. There's you name it. There's crime. It's there. But this was outside of any of that.
Yeah.
Could not have possibly imagined. And yeah, it was a big deal. It was a really big deal. So, of course, he's quickly, held. They charge him with aggravated mayhem because at that time they didn't have he had a breast in his hand, but they didn't know how he got it.
Yeah.
So they book him on that and they start questioning him. What I found really interesting was that he and Rodney claimed that, going in there, Wayne was like, I want a lawyer. Rodney, of course, you're going to have a lawyer.
Yeah.
We're going to make sure that you're covered. And that's your right, which it is. And they say this repeatedly throughout this, that, he wants a lawyer present as he's confessing. But there isn't one. So they request it. And even though one is not brought in for, I'm not sure what reason, he keeps confessing. He keeps talking. And he keeps, talking about more and more outside of just what the breast is.
Yeah.
The detective who investigated the Jane Doe case interviews him that night without a lawyer present. By Ford's account, he wasn't sure when he picked her up, if she was a runaway or a sex worker. He just saw her around sometime in the 15th of the month, so 15th of October, on Highway 101, which is the main highway in and out of Eureka. She was waiting for a ride at a bus stop, and he pulled over and picked her up. He tried remembering some of their conversation. He thinks that she said she was from Colorado or Arizona, which is quite a big difference.
Yes.
He described her as average height with brown hair and eyes, and she was very top heavy. So, of course, he's a breast man.
Yeah.
That appealed to him, apparently. She was wearing a T-shirt that had some environmentalist saying or logo on it, and then she also had a JanSport backpack, possibly had like a Greenpeace emblem on it. Ford claims that she talked quite a bit on how she didn't get along with her parents, but that she was close to an aunt, and he thinks possibly this aunt was her child, because remember, they knew that she had given birth. Her child was living with this aunt.
Oh.
So from there, they know they have him on that Jane Doe case. He eventually will tell them where some of the other body parts are. So then they start talking about, the remains. And he says he dismembered Jane Doe to make her, quote unquote, smaller in his bathroom tub in his travel trailer. He states that up until a few days prior to him turning himself in, he had actually been storing her thighs in his stand-up freezer. But he had recently buried them near a place where he was camping near Patrick's Point in Trinidad. So he also states he burnt her breast tissue down in the oven and kept it inside a coffee canister. And they find that.
Wow.
So as well as confessing to picking up and raping other women who survived his torture, Wayne gives details about 3 other women he's murdered. That info is sent out to other law enforcement agencies, and authorities from counties all over the fucking place start contacting Humboldt County Sheriff to set up interviews with Wayne. Everybody is trying to make him for a crime.
Yeah.
It's unreal. So, side note, I found this ironic because this is how small the circle of serial killers is. When the info gets out, authorities from up here in Spokane and Tacoma contact the sheriffs looking for a match to victims in the areas up here that they have. They wouldn't have their guy for another 2 years. So we now know those are Robert Lee Yates victims.
Oh, who they were looking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they wouldn't arrest him until 2000.
Yeah.
But his MO, I mean, Yates shot his victims, but he also had that weird thing where he tied the plastic bags over their heads. And given that he was a truck driver and he would go to, random places to deliver, they started trying to connect him to the crimes for Yates. It's crazy to me.
Yeah.
It's like that 6 degrees of separation almost of serial killers.
Yeah.
I thought that was really funny ironic when I read that. So the next victim that he's questioned in connection to is Lynette White. He says he picked her up in Fontana, California at a truck stop. He agreed to pay her for a blowjob. He doesn't remember killing her. What he says is that he, quote, may have had his hands around her neck and squeezed. But he tried to resuscitate her.
Yeah.
So, he wanted to get his kicks, but he didn't want her to die necessarily.
Yeah.
He just, wanted to have fun. So at some point that didn't work and she died. And he decided that he was going to wrap her up, put her clothing on the body and wrap it in a blue tarp. And he drove around with her in his sleeper compartment in his truck for days until the smell got too bad and he disposed of the body near Lodi. And that is why it looked like the body had been bent
forward. Yeah.
Right. So detectives from San Bernardino are waiting to talk to him when he's done with the ones from the San Joaquin area. He tells them he was making a run to Victorville when he picked Patricia Thames up. They pull over, they get intimate. He says he can't remember again how she stopped breathing. I have no idea. But then again, he tried to resuscitate her and it didn't work.
Didn't she have a broken neck?
Yes.
Yeah. That could possibly be one of the causes too.
Not only that, but he paralyzed her. Yeah. Essentially. So he also kept her in the bunk of his truck until he found a place to dump her near that aqueduct near Hesperia. So on November 5th, authorities come to question Ford about Tina Gibbs. The story is very similar. He picked her up in Las Vegas. He promised to drive her to Salinas, California. They end up engaging in sex. And again, he just doesn't remember how she stopped breathing. But he revived her more than once to keep going until he couldn't revive her anymore. And she died.
What the fuck?
Can you imagine being resuscitated in that manner and waking up knowing that
It's still not over.
It's still not over.
Yeah. The nightmare's still there.
That is what I find, I think, probably even more than him having the breast. I find that the most disturbing, I think. Disregard for anybody else.
Yeah.
So it's, like I said, this is disturbing shit. So, of course, he disposes of her body when he can no longer hide it. And that's how she ends up in the Southern California area. So keep in mind, he, at this point, still has not been seen by a lawyer.
Oh, and
there's not been all these
interviewing him?
Yes, all these confessions. And his mental state is not good. They move quickly to have him arraigned in the Humboldt County Superior Court on one count of murder of Jane Doe. That is on November 6th. In December, he's indicted on one count of first-degree murder, and they set a trial for the summer of 1999. But before the trial is set to begin, he is arrested on the 3 additional counts of first-degree murder for Tina Gibbs, Lynette White, and Patricia Thames. From there, he's transferred to West Valley Detention Center in Southern California to stand trial in San Bernardino County. So due to 2 of the victims being, from there and murdered there, they decided to move the trial down to that area, which I thought was interesting.
For all 4?
For all 4. So there is a law that states that is permissible in these types of charges.
Better too, because nobody knows him down there.
Yeah, and I could see why Eureka wouldn't have been the place for that. Your jury selection would have been...
It's a small pool.
It's a small pool, and everybody knew everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can see where that would not have gone. Funny story. I actually was being selected or going through the jury selection process right about this time. So I could have easily have been picked for that if they had kept that up in Eureka. I think about that now, about how different circumstances could have happened. Yeah. And just weird shit that you don't think about. And it's a close call for things. So things, after he's transferred, things come to a standstill for about 4 years because they start looking at his confessions, and his lawyers, when he finally gets one, contends that some of that shouldn't be used because he was asking for lawyers to be present, and either one never showed up or one was not permitted to see him. Either way, he gave them a wealth of information that he necessarily shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
So eventually a judge ruled that none of the confession he gave after November 5th in 1998 can be used in the trial. It's still another 2 years before jury selection begins. The trial doesn't start until March of 2006.
Holy shit.
Right. I had to go back and really research that because even in the system taking long, that was a long ass time to even get a jury selected. So going back to the intro, I mentioned that nature versus nurture argument, and that is what his defense team tried to use. So not necessarily as you may think, however, they weren't trying to get him off on like a mental competency. They were trying to bring evidence and witnesses to the trial that showed how his upbringing had a lot to do with why his mental state was so deteriorated, which led to these crimes. They also claimed that he didn't premeditate any of the killings and that he in fact done something unheard of, which was to turn himself in because he was feeling remorse. But he was also fearful that he was going to harm his ex-wife. He thought that at some point it was going to get to the point where he would try to kill her in the manner that he had killed all of these women.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to leave his son an orphan, is what he said.
Okay.
So the judge ruled that none of that actually had any basis for consideration in the trial and wouldn't allow it. He stated that his family history and, mental competency, because he was competent to stand trial, that any other issues that he was having would be more appropriate to be discussed in the sentencing phase.
Yeah.
So, they tried. They repeatedly tried, saying that, the nature versus nurture theory showed that he was a product of his environment and life situations. The judge just was like, yeah, no, I'm not. This is not the time and place. We're not discussing it here.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't allow it.
More of it isn't premeditated, and I agree with that. It wasn't premeditated, but, seeing the girl at the bus stop, the Jane Doe, then he had those thoughts, and then he killed her. You know what I mean? Like, it escalated. And even with, the lady he gave the ride from Vegas that he promised to take over to Salinas.
Right.
That I'm sure he wasn't like her. I'm going to kill her. But just those thoughts crept in and the evil crept in. And it just seems like every single one of those that's how it happened. Like it just, he was evil.
Yeah. I definitely think that there is more than a mental illness issue here.
Yeah. Well, so the way I'm thinking is, along with his brother, it's a pattern. Like, he gets in trouble, he goes to his brother helps.
Right.
He meets these women, and then somehow they end up dead. He doesn't know how.
Right.
I don't know how her neck broke. I tried to revive her, but I think it's the pattern that he just falls into this pattern.
Well, it's definitely a pattern because he acknowledges that he did this with at least 50 other women, and most of them survived.
Yeah.
So kind of leading into that, another thing I found interesting was that the prosecution called one of his many rape victims to testify against him. So she had been treated to the same torture as the murdered victims, but somehow survived. She survived being strangled and resuscitated multiple times, as well as being injured and burned in her vaginal area repeatedly.
Oh.
Yeah. So, like I said, there are a lot of details. I didn't necessarily feel it was important to bring up, but the testimony that she gave directly corroborated his confession of his crimes, of the murders, but also showed that this was his pattern. The 4 victims who died were the unlucky victims who died. There was 50 or so more who had been victims that survived this exact same treatment.
Huh.
I really applaud her for being able to go through that, knowing that she was going to be looked at, in a shitty way for being a sex worker.
Yeah.
having to face Ford while she's testifying. And reportedly, the defense team like laid into her and really just, treated her like shit on the stand.
See, and I always want to ask the question, like, why didn't she just go to the cops? And then I forget, because she's a sex worker, and that's how the defense treated her, and it's just this bias that they have back then. I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
Today, I don't care. You're a sex worker. Hey, do what you need to do. But yeah, back then it was a little different, I guess.
Well, she did actually file a report.
Oh.
With the police. And she did a rape kit, but they had no leads.
Okay.
And he wasn't in the system. So there wasn't anything to process that led to him.
Yeah.
There actually was another sex worker who they wanted to come and testify, but unfortunately she was heavily addicted to crystal meth and would not have been able to be a witness.
Yeah. Couldn't sit still for a second.
No.
Sorry, it's not funny.
It's not, but I mean, we all know what that looks like.
Yeah.
So they chose not to put her on the stand, but her experience backed up this experience, which backed up the murders. So they did have people that came forward. It didn't help because he wasn't in the system.
Yeah.
So it's a thing that damn well that this is a crime. This is a crime against another person. As a defense attorney, it's your job to make that look like it couldn't have happened or, discredit that in any way. And what are they going to use? They're going to use the fact that you're a sex worker against you because that is a punishable crime.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of reasons why people do that. And I could make a whole fucking season and a podcast on the history of sex workers and prostitution and why it is. It's not always what you think it is. And these people don't deserve to be shit on because you don't agree with their life choices.
Yeah, stay tuned for our new podcast, Sex Workers.
I mean, honestly, I feel like I mentioned that at least once a podcast. But who are our victims?
Yeah.
Who are we looking at in the cases that we're looking at? And who do these people choose to go after? Easy target, easy prey. And then they're condemned by a society that should be prosecuting the person who commits the crime against them. Their being a sex worker doesn't negate that a crime was committed against them.
Yeah.
That's what people need to understand. So I feel like every episode we discuss this. It's just bullshit and it pisses me off. But needless to say, she had the balls. She got up there. She said what she needed to do, what she needed to say to do what she needed to do. And the adversity that I'm sure she went through, I'm sure it sucked.
Yeah.
And good for her for being able to do it.
Yes, good for her.
Yeah. So after 3 months at trial, Wayne Adam Ford was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced shortly after in August of 2006 to the death penalty. So his lawyers immediately appealed, stating that, he was guilty of 4 accidental murders. He didn't mean to kill them. He tried to resuscitate them.
Yeah.
But the ruling of the first-degree murder was upheld, and Ford was then moved to San Quentin prison, where he sits on death row to this day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he's not going to see it. We all know that.
No, California doesn't fucking put anybody to death. Not that I necessarily agree or disagree with it, but call it what it is. We'll call it what it is. If you're not going to process anybody under the death penalty, then call it life in prison, because that's what it is. Don't say you've got a death penalty when you don't give it.
Yeah.
That's all. That's my issue with it. If you're convicted and you are sentenced to death, you should be put to death.
Yeah.
You should get an appeal or 2 out of it. If there's any wrongdoing, it should be looked at. After that, sorry, that is the ruling.
Yeah.
A jury decided that. A judge upheld it. If you're not going to fucking do it, then don't call it that. That's all. That's my thing. So one of the reasons that this case was so interesting to us, of course, we lived there.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember at that time, like I said, I was just a couple of days away from turning 19 when they found that body, literally down the street from where my grandma and I were living.
Yeah.
And it scared the shit out of me. I was scared shitless because I'd never been anywhere where that had happened before.
Yeah.
And she was a young girl. Of course, I'm not a sex worker or hitchhiker or anything like that. I didn't feel like I was going to be in danger of anything like that. It was just the fact that somebody's life could be ended in that way and then not be identified.
Yes.
And not have a resolution. You know, for a whole year, we went in that community knowing there was no suspect.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's kind of crazy to me to think that we were there at that time. You weren't truck driving yet, right? No, not yet. I was going to say, did anybody ever come where you worked from like Ready Mix, or did you ever have any interaction with anybody?
No.
Okay.
But when I did get into truck driving, a lot of those places, you know, you go to the scales, they were right there on Broadway, and, you know, everybody was talking about it. So even still then, when I did get, you know, work for that company, truck driving, you know, it was still.
Well, you didn't work for the same company.
No, I didn't.
We're not naming where you worked, but yeah, it was, and that was a very prominent, Edeline Trucking was a prominent company in Eureka.
Very much so.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a small community, little connections like that mean a lot, and people remember these things and they know these things and they talk about these things.
Yes.
So very, very crazy. But I have to say, just looking at details of this made me just remember a lot, you know, early years of our relationship was, you know, because our relationship was starting right around this time.
Yeah.
So I had my own little trip down memory lane that had nothing to do with this murder and this crimes, but you know, it reminded me. I remember when they found that torso. Like I remember that day very clearly, and I remember we were supposed to be going out to dinner for my birthday. Yeah, because that was the day that we could all go and do it. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting, and then made me think about where my grandma's house and how close it was to that. And I started, looking on Google Maps of images and looking at her house, which it looks nothing like that now. It's completely been redone. And I almost looking on Google Maps, I was like, I kept going. I was like, wait a minute. Cause you can put the little person on the road the street, and then kind of hit the arrow and it'll go up a little bit and a little bit. And I typed in the address and I looked at the house and I didn't recognize it. Yeah. And then I was like, wait a minute. No, the Church of God was right next door. And there was that house that was next door that was red. I remember that. And it it was kind of interesting to how all these little memories come back. Yeah. I hadn't thought about in a long time.
Or blocked.
Blocked. No, honestly, I think I claim, and I'm a fervent believer, every time I got pregnant, brain cells died.
What?
I'm not shitting you. I feel like I retain less and less every time I got pregnant. I had baby brain.
Oh.
And I just would forget things or not remember things I don't know. But I also slept a lot during that time. Yeah. I couldn't stay awake.
This is true.
Yeah. It was fun times, but yeah. So very interesting case. Whether you believe in nature versus nurture, people are shitty and do shitty things, and that this is definitely one of those cases.
And it just gets me thinking too, more and more, like how we're coming into Halloween and how it's scary, and we have all these monster stories,
right?
But then we go over these cases and I'm like, there are monsters for real. Like,
yeah,
these people are monsters.
Yeah,
we don't need like Halloween stories or the Grimms, and it's people.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. I've always told you when you made me watch Saw, the first movie.
Hey, that's a good movie.
The cutting of, having to cut off your arm to get out of a box or whatever the case, killing somebody else so that you could survive. Yeah, it's interesting. And it's not a good thought to have. No. Nobody wants to be in that position. But what freaked me the fuck out was that guy in the closet. The fact that the mom and the kid were home alone and that guy was in the closet and they had no idea. Yeah. That is when I was like, I can't watch this anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm done with this movie.
Okay.
Because during that time, you were gone a lot of the time for work and it was just me and the girls at home a lot of the time. overnight, all the time. And the fact that somebody could be in my house and I not know about it and they intend to harm me or my children and I couldn't protect myself or them, that is a scary thought.
Yeah.
That is the realest, most truthful, scary thought that I think I could ever have. And like you said, that's the aspect. People are the monsters. We don't need these extra stories. They're fucking real life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely in this case, the monster was a real person. It's just very sad. I hope that, his family members and the victims' families, I hope that at some point there was some closure for all of them. Unfortunately, there's never going to be closure until they identify the torso, if they ever do, if they ever can. But, we always talk about DNA becoming a thing. They do have DNA from that. So hopefully it's there someday.
Yeah.
But all right, guys, that's going to do it for this episode. As always, be fucking kind to one another. We're all going through shit. Just be kind, okay? And, like we always say, stay out of the goddamn woods.
Stay out of the woods.
It's no good. Bye, guys.
Go vote.
Yes.
Vote. Bye.